How old is she?
7 months old.
Oh, she's not even a child. She's like a
Yes.
baby. That's so
That's
exciting.
such a wonderful name, Elena.
Yeah.
Is it a,
Thank you.
I mean, it's a name in so many cultures. So
Right.
what's the framework for your choice?
Um, I don't know if you've read the Elena Ferrante quartet
Oh,
of
yes,
novels.
but I haven't read it, but I know what you speak.
I don't know what you
Yeah,
speak about. What are they?
they're this great set of novels written by this author, Elena Ferrante, who is, I guess, kind of pseudonymous. People don't know who she actually is.
Uh-huh.
And it covers what kind of, I guess, post-war Italy, uh, lifelong friendship between two women, and kind of how their lives go up and down, and
Huh.
different things happen. I don't want to spoil it too much, but
Okay.
it's great. There's an HBO series that's pretty faithful to the books. I think the books are better, but the HBO series isn't bad. Also, I
Okay.
think they're only on like the second or third book though, so there's still a little to go.
All right.
Now,
Anyways,
is
my
We'll
it
put
my
it
is
in
it
wife
the
and
show
I
is it a
notes.
read
quartet
those
or is it
together.
more than a quartet?
I think they're just four in that.
Yeah.
Uh, there are other books by Elena Ferrante, but I think those are the best four. Um, and yeah, my wife and I read those uh, before we got married, and really enjoyed them. Um, yeah, the main character in the books is also named Elena, and she's not exactly a model for our child, so we don't necessarily want her to be exactly like her. She's human, she's flawed, she's got good traits and bad traits. But yeah, that was the inspiration behind it.
So is it
What?
with the H? I sort of heard an H there when you pronounced it.
No H, just
No H. Okay.
ELENA. Yeah.
All right.
What is she? What is your child like? I mean, do you have a sense? I mean, at
Yeah.
7 months, you kind of have a sense. So, what's
Yeah.
your sense? What's she like?
Um, Pretty firm-willed, I think. Pretty independent. Um, uh, Fairly happy. She's slept very well. We're very lucky on that
Oh my
count.
God.
She slept very well since the
She's an
beginning.
angel.
So yeah. Um, but uh, I feel like she learned to say no even without words very early. Um, just like turning her head away from the bottle, or using her body to indicate I've had enough. like kind of wanting to take control of her environment pretty early on.
Cool.
Very nice. So we're at this point in the show where we remember that we haven't asked
Oh,
or
right.
introduced you. And then we also, we like to talk about anything. I got a very
Yeah.
nice Julia email or message through LinkedIn. This person saying how much they liked our podcast in that we talk
Oh,
about anything. And I'm like,
that's true.
you got the point exactly, right?
Yeah.
There are no limits.
There are no limits. But I'm particularly, well, I'm always happy to talk to all the guests, but Roberto and Ross Roquero, who was with us a few months ago, belong to a special, unique little place in my life. The 5 years during which I always knew what were the best restaurants in town to eat at, because all the Deloitte kids knew what the best restaurants in town were to eat at, and I wasn't stuck in this thing that happens to people as they age, where they only go to the restaurants that they've always gone to.
Yeah.
And Roberto, why don't you describe yourself, your
Sure.
background, your passions, which I think you have
Okay.
many, and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, originally. Uh, I guess two early influences in my life were wrestling and computers. So I started playing video games and tinkering with computers pretty early on. Um, and I started wrestling in first grade. I didn't win my first match until third grade. So um, I stuck it out though, and um, went to college in Southern Virginia, small liberal arts school. Thought I was going to major in
Oh,
computer
what school was
science.
that?
Washington and Lee.
Okay,
Oh,
I
yeah,
didn't know
sure.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I I wanted a smaller school. I wanted a school with a wrestling program. I had studied Russian since middle school, which was not all that common to find at a lot of schools. Um, so those three things combined kind of gave me a short list. Um,
Mm. I love
and I
that you
think
wrestled with wrestling, that you didn't win till third grade. That like
yeah,
wrestling was like part of it. It seems so meta.
yeah, yeah, I think it is pretty meta. And um, it's taught me a lot of interesting lessons throughout life, and something that um, I think applies to a lot of different fields. Partly because it's not a team sport, or the team
Mhm.
sport aspect of it is not very apparent. There are certain team aspects to it because you have a training partners, and you have kind of the esprit de corps of a team, but um, your performance is individual. Um, but yeah, I thought I was going to be a computer science major. This was I graduated in 2009, so this was about the time where you could start really learning stuff online in self-directed fashion, and I realized I could teach myself most of this computer science stuff. I'd kind of been doing that already, um, and I'd always kind of considered myself a generalist. So I took the time to study Russian and econ in college. Um, Graduated in 2009, had enough computer skills to go to work for Deloitte doing cybersecurity work for public sector clients. Uh, Spent 3 years, kind of early on-site cybersecurity implementation work, and then joined the program that Carmen mentioned, GovLab, for a year, which is where our paths crossed. Um, and that was a pretty big turning point for me. I think it opened my eyes to a lot of the issues I was seeing in cybersecurity were um, they came up again and again, and I was kind of like, why are these problems happening? There seems to be a technical solution to them, um, but there was something else going on in either the business model or regulatory public policy land. Um, and so I thought, like, oh, the intersection of technology with policy with business is really interesting, and that set me on a path to go to grad school and study business and public policy. Uh, so I spent one more year at Deloitte, moved over to the financial services practice, moved up to New York, and then went to grad school for 3 years. Um,
In what?
it was a dual degree program, an MBA and a master's in international affairs.
Cool.
Um, and the best thing about that maybe was that neither school knew exactly what I was doing, so I could take classes all over the university. So I cross-registered into a bunch of engineering classes, um, met a guy who was doing a master's in computer science, and we started a business together, serving financial institutions, mostly fintechs, startup banks and stuff in New York, helping them get their cybersecurity system set up. Um, did that for about 3 years before going back to Deloitte to work on growth strategy and M&A for the head of cyber risk. Did that for just under 2 years, and then worked in venture capital for 2 years at a firm called Energy Impact Partners, uh, VC backed by corporate uh, limited partners, mostly utilities and industrials. Um, and then last year, I kind of took a step back and thought, what do I want to do for the next 10 years of my life? And is this the right path? And my wife was pregnant at the time, and decided to leave that. Took an interim role as a chief information security officer, in part to get my hands back on the technical side, and in part because it paid pretty well and was a short-term gig that let me take time off and spend it with my daughter over the last 6 months.
What do you want?
Yeah, I think I'm in the early stages now of raising some money to go buy a cybersecurity company
Mm.
and grow that. Um, so I think I want to spend more time hands-on building a business. I liked that aspect of the entrepreneurial journey. I think starting from scratch is incredibly hard. I have a lot of respect for people who've done that. But I also think there are a lot of businesses that have good customer base, good set of employees, that either could be operated more efficiently or could be grown faster. But the venture capital model is kind of binary. It's kind of all or nothing, and that wasn't a great fit for me. I'd rather do something where you can kind of preserve the relationship with the employees, preserve the relationship with the customers. Um, my family had family businesses, both the generation before my parents, and so I've kind of thought about that model a lot. And is there another way that's not the all or nothing path?
Cool. The middle path, as the Buddhists say.
Right. Right.
Yeah. What is the middle path? I love the conversation. I love conversation about the middle path, like what it looks like for different people. So I'm just curious, like
Yeah.
in a non externalized approach, like if you had to describe what the middle path feels like internally to you, what does
Mhm.
it feel like?
I mean,
Like
it's
what?
probably one where there's always some tension, right? Because you're
Huh.
not all in on the extremes, and you have to be. One thing I've found in life is that my personality fits better in a place um, where there's a little discomfort, and I think a lot of people, or maybe discomfort's the wrong one, maybe uncertainty.
Where
I think
there
there are a lot of people
is,
who,
where there is a
yes,
little discomfort, yeah, I want to,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, or where there is uncertainty. I think a lot of people, um, and it's not right or wrong. I think it's just kind of their personal makeup. Um, really prioritize certainty, or comfort makes it sound, more pejorative when I'm saying this, but what I mean is that people really value that stability, and uh, just for whatever reason, my personality leans more in the direction of not being as troubled by uncertainty. So
Well,
that's
I'm
kind of
sort of
what the
being
middle path
attracted
means, I
to it,
think.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I relate to that. It's almost like the uncertainty shows you the path, where you
yeah,
have that tension where you're not totally uncertain, but you're not certain. That shows you
yeah.
sort of where the ridge line is. Yeah,
When
cool.
when I was in London, actually in Somerset, where I spent Thanksgiving, I
Hmm.
had Thanksgiving dinner with longtime friends of mine, and then Henrietta Wilson, a friend of the Pandas, who
That's
appeared
right.
early on, and her husband, Seth Bullock, her partner
Hmm.
husband, Seth Bullock, who is a professor in artificial intelligence at the University of Bristol. And so we had a great dinner, great conversation, and he runs some kind of AI program at the University of Bristol. One of the last acts of the conservative government was to create 9 centers of excellence of some kind on AI. So
Cool.
Seth, uh, who looks like a cross between Lenin and Trotsky, I would say.
And
Uh,
not John Lennon.
no, not John Lennon, the other Lennon.
Hmm.
Seth was talking. He's been in AI from the beginning. He started.
Hmm.
He's a little older than you are, probably 10 years older than you are, and
Okay.
he started in modeling. Smart
Hmm.
agent-based modeling, replications of social
Yeah.
dynamic kind of things. And so he's been in the field for a long time, 20 years. And he
Hmm.
said, there's always been a battle in AI between what he called the neats and the scruffs.
100%.
You know what that means. Looks like you know what that means, Rob. But he
Hmm.
says the neats want believe that there's some perfect logic tree that you can build
Right.
that will faithfully represent reality, and all your options and choices will be and contingencies will be on that logic tree. And the scruffs say, you silly man, that doesn't exist at all. And what we
Right.
stumble into as we continue to stumble is always going to be the best of all possible worlds, because it's the only possible of the possible worlds. It's the way
Hmm.
we went, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. He called himself, I'm basically a scruff, but I'm neat compatible kind of thing.
Hmm.
Uh and I just saying that made me think, I think basically it's easier for scruffs to be neat compatibles than the
Yes.
other direction. But maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to be challenged.
No, that's got to be true because if you're a scruff,
Yeah.
part of the best possible path includes the neats because they exist. So it's just much
Right.
more inclusive, right?
Right. So
Yeah.
what do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that part of being a neat is kind of being intolerant in a way. I don't mean that to be an insult, but you have a very rigid idea of what is and what isn't, and so you can't necessarily accept the scruffs into your camp. Um, I guess I'd be curious to hear where you would place yourselves on the neat to scruff spectrum, and is it important to be neat compatible if you're more on the scruff side?
You want to go first, Julia? Or
Sure. I mean, I'm definitely a scruff. But I was trained up as a neat.
Hmm.
So I feel like I can talk to neats and understand neats.
Yeah.
Uh, and I see it as I see both as necessary. Like this
Yeah.
is I live where you're talking about it. I like to live in this middle path where it's like
Hmm.
that's necessary. My nature is sort of like this, but my nature is only one possible type of nature. But that's a scruff way of thinking, right? So
Hmm.
I definitely think I'm neat compatible and even have admiration for that because if you're going to go in that deep worldview, you do make progress. Like
Hmm.
you can make some progress because you are defining some rules that are there or that
Hmm.
seem to speak to some portion of the substrate of reality or something. And so it's like that's progress, that's useful. And if you push it too hard, it breaks.
Hmm.
It always breaks. And so it's the pushing it too hard that I sort of think, okay, that's where you gotta let it go.
yeah. So I am definitely a scruff by nature.
Hmm.
Although again, I was, the first sort of academic kind of thing that I excelled at was debate.
Hmm.
Not only do you have to be neat in debate, but you have to be neat under intense time pressure,
Yeah.
which is like some, moment of, I don't know, it's really intense to be neat when you're a college debater and you have 3 minutes to give the winning rebuttal in a debate. But I think I definitely in my youth, I think I was quite neat. I
Hmm.
had tremendous interest in knowledge and wanting to know everything. So I even, obviously I believe that was even possible, right?
Hmm.
It's like all those people during the Renaissance and Enlightenment who were trying to collect all knowledge. There's a whole group of these nutty,
Hmm.
usually German, sometimes Polish. I'm
Right.
just thinking back on the ones I know, who were like trying to create museums that contained all knowledge. They were very funny. Anyway, then as I became more experienced, I think the scruffiness just took over me, and I actually had a life moment. Moment is exaggerating, but definitely a few weeks, a few months of time where I
Hmm.
went, this neatness thing has been all wrong. I didn't use those words.
Hmm.
And I'm going to stop being neat. I wasn't sure what I
Hmm.
was headed toward, but I knew I was headed away from neatness. And that's how I wandered
Yeah.
into scruffiness. And now
Hmm.
I'm very proud to be a scruffy. And my relationship with neatness is uh that and this is a little self-serving, but I'm jet lagged, so whatever. The thing about scruffiness that I like in relationship to neatness is I love to be underestimated. I
Hmm.
There is no position that I would rather be in than be in a meeting where I know people have no expectations of me.
Right.
And then I say something which needed to be said, which everyone goes, that was useful. Why are you saying it?
Yeah.
Yes, I totally relate to that.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
You get it, right?
that's a glee. It's like, ha ha ha, you didn't know what I could contribute.
You're
Yeah.
being so neat. You've totally ignored this huge road over here, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
It almost gives you permission to be the one. I mean, the other people who
Mhm.
have all the expectation can't say the thing that everyone's thinking but won't say.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so where
Have
do
you
you
ever read
see,
this?
well, okay,
Sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Just go with where you were going.
I was going to ask if you've ever read this book by Lewis Hyde called Trickster Makes the World. Trickster Makes This World.
No,
I
that sounds
I
amazing.
I don't think I have. I am familiar with uh sort of the discussion around the trickster
The archetype.
archetype, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so
that book sounds amazing. We're going to stick it in the show notes. Can you tell us about it? That sounds really cool.
it's such a wonderful book. I mean, I haven't read it in a number of years now. I should go back and revisit it. But it's exactly what you would think. It's about trickster archetypes, and it's kind of a cross-cultural comparison of different trickster archetypes and why they pop up in basically every culture, and um, the role they play, and then some kind of real world examples of people who you might identify with the trickster archetype, and um, uh, yeah, I don't know if I'm doing it justice, but
No,
that's the
I
direction that
definitely
it's in.
have to read that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So where do you
it's
think
tremendous.
of yourself? I mean, so my impression of you is
Mhm.
that you are neater than either uh, Julia and I, although that may just be because you have such a neat haircut.
No,
Possibly. I
I
did get a
sense
haircut
that.
yesterday, so it was a little scruffier before. Um, yeah, I mean, maybe it's a little like you, Carmen, in that you like being underestimated. Um, maybe I get some utility or some joy out of people thinking I'm neater than I am.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I think people, the neats can identify a scruffy from a mile away, and to some extent, because they're the less tolerant side of the spectrum. If that's the case, you'll never fully get to know them, I guess, or maybe their guard will always be a little up, if you just lead with the rougher parts, or the you know with the idea that certain outlandish ideas are possible, or you should open your mind to more potential, um, and so to convince them of that, maybe it's helpful to appear neater. um, I don't know. I grew up in quite a liberal environment, and then my college experience is one of the most conservative schools in the country.
that's
Um,
right.
Right,
so maybe that
Washington Lee.
yeah, so maybe that shaped me in that way, and um, again, I think it's that ability, or even like of being in the discomfort, or dealing with the uncertainty. Um, I always joke that I like living in New York the best because of kind of the major metro areas, um, because it's a place where you can be a contrarian optimist. If
Ah,
you're in San Francisco Bay Area, you know there are a lot of uh, there are a lot of optimists out there, and there are a lot of people who would like to be contrarian. But if everyone around you is an optimist, the only way to be contrarian is to be a pessimist. Um,
nice, yeah.
That is
and I
true.
and I think that you know it's it's my nature to be a little bit against the grain, but also not in a kind of doomer way.
Yeah.
Now,
So I'm interested in your, oh, sorry, Carmen.
oh, uh, go ahead, you go.
Okay, I was fixated on you using the word utility. You said maybe I get a little
Mm.
utility or joy, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna come in for the kill on that one. So
Sure.
so it suggests that, you're sort of modeling, or maybe it's a habit, or maybe it's accurate, and so I'm just sort of curious which it is. Do you model sort of your mind, or the sort of behavioral economics model, where the only thing that matters are these operational definitions that can be seen from the outside? Or do you believe that joy exists as a motivational force inside human beings?
instinctively my answer is yes to both of those. But certainly yes to the joy part. Yeah, I think there are intrinsic motivators or I don't know if you want to call them metaphysical things that aren't just pure material units of satisfaction, that you can kind of accumulate. Uh, I mean, it's probably a habit just from having spent years studying econ and then going to business school, and this is kind of the way people speak and think about things. I think it's useful to some extent. Yeah, but I do think there is, underlying philosophical question in a lot of econ, like what is utility? What is, it economists take it as a given, and it's very much not. But I've meant it less as like a unit of um, of incremental enjoyment, or however people intend to use it in econ, and more as just like I get some use. There's some value that's not just my own joy out of maybe presenting as um, a little more buttoned up than you might feel internally. Just that
Oh,
it gets other people to maybe be more open to that conversation.
oh, interesting. Thank
So,
you. Although I do think it's interesting you said then it's more valuable than just your own joy. I kind of feel like your own joy is kind of valuable.
Yes, that's true. I
so
would
I
agree
was
with
going to
that.
ask you, I don't know if you got a chance to watch our Pandas with Jeff Caruso, who is just
Cyber warfare guy.
just wrote a book on cyber warfare, and he's been in the cyberspace forever. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think he used to go under Jeff Carr, Carr,
Hmm.
but then he
Hmm.
returned his name to more authentically what it had been, the family name.
Hmm.
But he talks I thought it was very interesting because he talks about how software, and this reminded me of something you said at the very beginning, Rob.
Hmm.
He said that software is a fundamentally flawed industry.
Hmm.
And Julia, you were working with that material more closely than I was because she was excerpting it and so forth, and I was traveling. But what's that argument he makes that it doesn't have to be fundamentally flawed, but people are
No,
Hmm.
just
he
too
says it's,
lazy about it, or what was his argument?
he was saying, if I remember correctly, he was saying software from the beginning has had bugs. Any complex piece of code will have bugs,
Hmm.
but people can create software that is secure. We just
Yeah.
don't. And I think that gets to, I wonder, actually, I was wondering about that, if that gets to, Robert, what you were saying about these issues that come up, like when you were serving the
Hmm.
public sector and you're like, why, there's a technical solution, why do we still have this problem?
Right.
And becomes a people problem. And I'm very
Yeah.
curious about how that feeds into your life path. Like
Hmm.
recognizing that there's a people problem here, and then have you been able to figure out how to solve it? And if so, are you going to solve that with your new company that you're buying?
um, yeah. I mean, there's so much there to discuss. I guess I think I had cited uh, Jeffrey Caruso, I guess under Jeff Carr, in a paper in grad school. So I'm familiar with his work. Uh, I think I listened to the podcast, but I was probably distracted and doing something else, dishes or changing diapers or something. Uh, so it's all kind of blurring together now. Um, I think it is true that we could write code that is, provably secure, mathematically secure, and we don't. Um, I think people very often blame the business model first, um, of the software industry. I think that is probably true, um, although I think it's also very hard, and maybe there are not enough people who are incentivized or want to write um, code that is secure from first principles. Did we lose Julia?
Did you?
I don't think so.
Oh no,
No, we're
maybe.
here.
No, I was
Sorry.
just nodding.
Maybe maybe it just froze on my end. yeah, I guess whether software is fundamentally flawed or not, there's a question of how sparse or dense are bugs in software, and you know, not all security issues are bugs necessarily. Some could be, the design requirements allow for some manipulation of the software that wasn't originally intended, or maybe it's a feature that people want in the software and there is this malicious use of it.
Mhm.
But to the extent that cybersecurity issues are bugs, it's an important question: how dense are the bugs, and is it a worthwhile endeavor to go around patching the software of all the bugs, or are there just so many bugs that we're never going to catch up, and we have to think about a different, broader solution. Um,
Like, do you think that privacy is equal to security? In other words, do you think
hmm,
that solutions that make everything incredibly private, even for law enforcement people, um, is that basically the most secure? Are these equivalent?
um, yeah, the privacy question is slightly different than the security question, but they're definitely related and intertwined. I don't know if I have a complete answer on that, or the previous question of have I solved cybersecurity, and is that what I'm going to go do in the next company? I guess I maybe this is just a gut instinct, but I guess my feeling is that there's a lot of incremental improvement to be made. The low hanging fruit is pretty low, and so the big questions are important, and the kind of, is it completely solvable in a mathematically verifiable way, is important, but there's so much to be done now that incremental improvements are where I should focus my time, and maybe where I can make the biggest contribution. Um, I'm sorry, I forget the question that you asked, though, Julia.
Oh, well, you have a 7-month-old, so even though she's sleeping, I figure you're allowed. Um,
Thank you.
no, just that I had a friend say to me recently who works in the field. He
Hmm.
said, in a certain sense, security and privacy are the same thing.
Hmm.
And what he's saying is, while a bunch of money launderers and human traffickers would be celebrating the idea of completely private systems that would allow them to do
Hmm.
their bad deeds, at the same time, those are secure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's some truth to that. I think this gets us to another topic that I think we had on the docket. Um, Cryptocurrency
Oh, yes.
is anonymous financial transactions, um, that work uh, for benefits of human rights and freedom, um, but also enable criminals. Is it kind of a net positive or not? Uh, I guess I lean on the side of, we should have, as a society, and maybe in terms of public policy, we should have fewer secrets but better protected.
Mhm.
Um, there's certainly things in like nuclear energy that are very important not to just have out in the open. Although I don't know how much of it is kind of intellectual property, and how much of it is just, it's difficult to stand up the supply chain and actually enrich uranium and things like that. I wouldn't want like a chat GPT instructing people on how to build nuclear bombs. That seems bad, regardless of whether that information is findable. Um, and so there is a place for secrets, uh, but it's very hard to, like, who watches this secret keeper, right? It's very hard to
Mhm.
determine which things should be secret. Um,
Mhm.
and I think the privacy and security questions are distinct, but overlap.
Well, yeah,
I don't know if that's a
I mean,
complete answer.
yeah, that's a nice, well, so I think it starts the conversation because it's like, cash. Cash
Hmm.
enables bad actors. It
Right,
also enables good things.
right.
So, are we deciding that we want a no cash culture? Um, that there are reasons why that would be a bad idea.
Yeah, I think
And
some countries have gone a lot further towards a
yeah,
cashless culture than the U.S. has, and the U.S. has interesting ideas around civil liberties and individual rights. And there are countries, it comes up often. Why don't we have a universal ID card? Right? We're kind of using these social security numbers in this unintended way. It's not great for anybody. Um, countries like India have universal IDs, and
yeah.
um, yeah, I
Thank God
think
we don't.
yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think
The
it's not a
inefficiency
path we should go down.
is a blessing.
Yes,
Well,
yes, it's
there's,
a feature, not a bug, I think.
yeah, there's an extent to which a lot of these things are made possible or are artifacts of this digital technology. So, I mean, when ledgers and accounting was kept by hand and a little stubby
Mhm.
pencil, there were lots of bugs. There were bugs
Yeah,
everywhere, all the
Yes,
time.
yes,
But the bugs hadn't, well, I mean, the bugs did have an ability to proliferate at scale if very early on in some spreadsheet process, you made a little mistake that wasn't caught, and that little mistake just continued to infect
mm,
every forecast going forward. So that's a
yeah,
way, but that's still different from the way bugs can affect things at scale. But so the
mhm,
point I want to make is that the idea that we can have bugless worlds and bugless software,
Mhm.
is that a reality? Is that in any way real, or is it simply an artifact?
mhm,
As my guide in Egypt always said, consequence of the fact that we've created this digital language and digital execution monstrosity that now
yeah,
allows us even to think about a bugless world. It
yeah,
always reminds me of Wittgenstein. Almost everything I ever say reminds me of Wittgenstein. And of course I always get him wrong, but it doesn't matter because he said everything. So you can say anything that he said. At some point he said and believed it, and then he moved away from
right.
it. But which is correct. But Wittgenstein did say just because we have a word to describe a concept, such as
Mm,
infinity, doesn't mean that that concept is real. I
right.
I, I get a lot of nutrition out of that
mm,
out of that
Mhm.
observation all the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
what is real?
yeah, I don't know where to go with this. I
Well, I
guess
will wherever you want to.
uh, I mean, I would love to learn more about Wittgenstein. Did you read it in the German?
Oh no, no. In fact, I read Ray Monk's biography of Wittgenstein.
Mhm,
That's my primary
mm,
source, and I find it's much easier for me to understand philosophers by reading their biographers, good biographies, than
yes,
by reading them. And
yeah,
I enjoyed the biography so much that since then I have read many things about Wittgenstein, articles,
mm,
they're like ancillary books. And I know that he went through a lot of periods, and a lot of the stuff that he said at the beginning, he kind of disavowed at the end. I would start with Ray Monk, or maybe there's even a more recent
yeah,
biography. But he was clearly, uh, well, he was clearly caught in the scruff neat
mm,
scruff neat battle for his soul, probably.
yeah,
Well, Carmen, I love what you said about that's correct. Like I think that's key. When you said, well, if I say something, it was something he agreed with and later moved away from, and that's correct. I
Mhm.
think that's key is like, life is long and thoughts change and ideas change. And if you have if you're an ideologue and you're holding on to one idea your whole life, that's incorrect because you have
Right.
not
mm,
learned anything.
You
That
have
idea
not
is
learned
wrong in
anything.
some way. Every idea is wrong in some way. And so moving away from that through the course
Yes.
of your life is in fact the most correct position,
Right.
right?
And at the risk of making
yeah,
a hasty generalization, which I always love to do in any case, I think some of these philosophers who end up really tortured souls,
Mm,
like Kierkegaard comes to mind,
yeah.
uh, are you can actually say that these are people who never moved on, never
Mm,
another phrase my Egyptian tour guide said that I adored, who never
mm,
evoluted away from his original ideas. And
100%,
yeah.
and
right.
then and then he just rages and churns the whole time. And if he would just like open the door and go through it and close it behind him, things would be
Mm,
much better. Much better.
So what we've evolved to in this conversation is scruffiness over time.
Evoluted.
We've evolved to
evoluted.
Yeah.
scruffiness over time.
So
I
Well,
like
I
it.
guess before I took us down the philosophical route, there are a couple other branches that I was thinking about
Mhm.
exploring. Well, I mean, one I guess is philosophical, but Julie, I'd like to know what you meant by asking what is real, um, and then I guess we could get back to the more prosaic actual cybersecurity. Just because we have a word for a bugless or a concept of a bugless code, does that mean it's real?
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to ask what is real because of this statement that just because we have a word for it doesn't mean that it's real. And so that I would
Mm,
sort of argue, I would pull a Wittgenstein and say, also that's false because if you have a word for something, haven't you just made it real? Right. So in other words, what
mhm,
is real about anything? So like a bug is a perfect example, actually.
yeah.
So a bug is not a physical thing. It's a flaw in logic, which is not in the physical world. Logic is not in the physical world.
Although I have heard, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but I've heard the origin of the word bug is
Oh yeah, there was
because
an original
little
bug,
bugs
right?
used to get caught in the vacuum tubes of old
Right.
clocks.
Those were real. Those were bugs. Those
Certainly,
were
certainly not
insects.
real today. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
But so is logic so by real, I'm always sort of wondering, do we mean does it have to be physical? Does something
Mm,
does something have to be observable in some way in the physical world to be considered real? And the funny thing is, obviously the answer is no, because I mean, from the point of view of our minds, our experiences we consider real all the time, but no one can really view our experiences, not even ourselves. I mean, our
mm,
experiences are a fabrication
right.
that we call real. And so I think the question of what is real is super interesting and maybe relates to the life of the mind that creates the idea of the bug. It's supposed to
Mm.
work like this, but it works like this. Is that real? Is that
Yes,
distance
right.
real?
Yes. Which
Or is it actually
Yeah,
supposed to work the way it works?
exactly.
right.
And we're the
Exactly.
last to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of engineer type brains and software developer type brains, they're on the neat side of the spectrum, and they have a very black and white view of, you know, the software is supposed to work like this, and anything that doesn't conform to that is either unintended or manipulation or a bug. And the cybersecurity, maybe more hacker mindset is clearly more on the scruffy side, um, and yeah, it's a kind of I don't know, not amoral or not apathetic view, but it's kind of just, well, the code works as it does, it's uh, yeah, maybe intent is less important on the scruffy side. It just evolutes.
It's just the best word.
That's a great word. I don't know.
But Carmen, you were going to say something before I took us back to those three branches.
Before what
Before I went back to the three branches of of
what three branches? What are we talking about?
the
The
the,
three branches
the
of
philosophers, Wittgenstein,
uh
real, and
oh, okay.
bugs.
Oh,
But I think you
okay.
wanted to
See,
say something
you were
more on
organizing as you
So
Wittgenstein.
were going
Robert's
along.
tracking the
Yeah,
conversation.
and I'm like,
I'm trying.
what happened? No, I did want to, at some point, I did want to, at some point, two things. Just have you talk a little bit about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and
Sure.
what you think is really going to happen.
Mm,
Disclaimer: I own two Bitcoin, which I bought a long time ago when I knew Rob.
Yeah.
So that's,
I should have bought a lot then.
yes. So that's
Or at
one.
least two.
And then the
Yeah.
second thing, I wanted at some point to just share my impressions about Cairo,
Mm,
and sort of how it relates to how we think about economy and scruffiness. But let's go to Bitcoin if that's okay, or
sure.
cryptocurrency in general.
Yeah. So, I mean, so we worked together back in 2013, was
Yep,
it? Around
2013 is
then, I
when I
think.
bought mine. Yeah.
And that's when I pitched this project to the partners at Deloitte, saying we should write a white paper about Bitcoin and what it means for public sector. Um, and I don't know if it was my pitch or it's just um, the zeitgeist was not right, but I did not connect with the partners at all. I
Mhm.
think I tried to explain it in terms of Starbucks cards, kind of e-money,
Mm.
um, tried to make it more relatable. Maybe that was a misstep, actually. I shouldn't have tried to, it maybe underplayed the importance of it by making it
Maybe it
analogous
wasn't your
to
fault at
Starbucks
all.
card. Yeah,
Might
it
not have,
certainly is
yeah,
possible.
yeah.
um, but uh, yes, I've been following this for a while. I'm not an active participant in the market, or at least I think some of the value of owning Bitcoin might not be in publicly owning Bitcoin. Um, and I think I don't know if I have any great insight. There's certainly more people more knowledgeable about this than me, but I think there are tools now that can de-anonymize transactions, and to the extent that's possible, I think it'll be much more difficult um, for Bitcoin to leave this area of being kind of a speculative asset. Um, my my understanding of it today is it's kind of a one-way trapdoor. Um, there are regimes where you can put money into Bitcoin and you may be able to get it out on the other side, but once it's out, um, you can't go back. And so that means it's very useful in some cases and not very useful in others. I think as an American citizen and somebody that um, isn't really that concerned about capital controls or the government confiscating my property, I don't find it super useful for my own purposes, but I'm glad it exists. Um, but I do think there's an open question of, well, who is the ultimate buyer of Bitcoin if that is the
Right.
case?
Right.
And I don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, do you think the value of Bitcoin could be to help train people on this idea of a blockchain? And the things that we can do with blockchain, like voting and such, might end up being more important than crypto?
I mean, I think peer-to-peer technology is really interesting. The proof of work solution that Bitcoin offers is very interesting.
Mm.
It does seem like Bitcoin is critical mass, and you need that for a peer-to-peer system. And it doesn't seem, I mean, Ethereum's been making progress steadily, but it seems like
Yeah.
it's hard to get away from these network effects where the more people own Bitcoin, the more valuable it is to be on the Bitcoin blockchain. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer to that, except that um, probably nothing succeeds like success, and Bitcoin has been the most successful so far. So uh, unless these de-anonymization tools become so cheap and readily available that it's not just large governments that can afford them, um, and probably you need some other kind of input to fully de-anonymize, right? You can trace the transactions, but you need to know, from other sources who's associated with some account so that you can trace it all the way. Um, but but outside of that just being fully accessible and cheap for everyone, um, I think Bitcoin will continue to be the leader and probably the most valuable blockchain. are there other applications like voting on the blockchain that I think are going to be important? I don't know. I, I'm kind of the belief that we shouldn't try to digitize voting too much. It's kind of like the cash of our political system, and
Mhm.
I would like to
Well,
have a cash option. Um,
mhm.
I don't know how far we are down that route already. I'm not an expert on voting machines either, or um, on voting security, although I know that's a hot topic.
Yeah. My interest in Bitcoin was always primarily philosophical in that it was
Hmm.
an approach to currency and value that was not that was self-organized rather than imposed upon people by a central power like a central
Right.
bank. And so as an anarchist, philosophically, you
Hmm.
know, a silly believer in the idea that humans may be able at some point to peacefully self-organize themselves to deal with issues at scale, which is the big problem with
Yeah.
anarchy, that not being able to deal with issues at scale. So I thought Bitcoin was like, well, this is a necessary building block if we ever want to get to
Yeah.
that world. So I'm happy to invest in it because I kind of believed in the concept. But uh, you know, all the other kind of things that people think about creating this digital society, and again, you know, the triumph of neatness overall, uber alles. I'm not there.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
just doesn't appeal to
Well,
me.
yeah.
what's the difference between uh, anarchist and a libertarian? I guess
Ah, they
in this
meet, they
framework.
kind of kiss.
There's a little
They
overlap,
kind of
but not
kiss at the
much.
back end. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
again, not an expert, but someone who cares about the ideas. I think that libertarians, I think that anarchists believe that we can organize ourselves. These are peaceful, nonviolent, classical anarchists. Believe
Yeah.
that what creates problems and conflict in society is the creation of institutions. And
Hmm.
what they say is that it's the creation of these institutions and power centers
Hmm.
that when a different group wants to control the power center, that you get all this conflict. So the problem
Yeah.
is the creation of the power centers. It's
Hmm.
not human ambition, it's not human greed, it's not human nastiness, it's making fun here. It's the creation of the power center. So if we just stop creating governments and large corporations, and if we could make them all go away, we'd be a peaceful, happy community of people. But
Hmm.
somehow we have to self-organize at scale, which I puzzle over. And then my understanding of libertarians is they are much, so I think anarchists are much more community focused, and I think
Hmm.
libertarians are much more individual focused. That
Hmm.
all libertarians want, you know, again, parity is to be left alone to pursue
Hmm.
their best interest as they can. And
Hmm.
occasionally they will join a community or a like-minded group of people because it benefits them, but
Hmm.
there's no expectation that they ever will need to. And
Hmm.
I mean, it's Carmen's like back of the envelope way of distinguishing them. Anarchists actually lead with community and believe in community.
Yeah.
And libertarians are much more focused on the individual.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's a pretty strong way of thinking about political ideology in general. Where are
Yeah.
they in the spectrum between the individual and the community?
Yeah.
And you can plot them all along the way there. And it's pretty useful.
I
wow,
was
I
thinking
love
in
that
terms of,
breakdown.
I think this maps to community versus individual, but I was thinking in terms of kind of if libertarians and anarchists are both, they both have a aversion to some form of centralized power, maybe,
Yes.
but they both recognize you need a coordinating mechanism, and maybe the mechanism that anarchists prefer is a community-based one, and the mechanism that libertarians prefer is maybe a market-based one,
Yes, I
and
think that's fair.
the markets kind of prize the atomized individual.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. So just recently, Robert, I finished reading basically the joint biography of David Hume and Adam Smith.
Oh,
Oh,
cool.
wow.
They were best friends. Hume
Mhm.
was 14 years older than Adam Smith. And
Mhm.
so my head is full of these ideas. And
Yeah.
it's worth reading. It's not as good as I wanted it to be, but it was definitely worth
Hmm.
reading. And there you
Well,
get
I'll
this, you
check
know,
it
the
out.
invisible hand, just leave the individual alone. At
Right.
scale, if left alone, individuals will come to the right place, which is
Hmm.
basically a scruffy idea.
Yeah.
It's
It
not
but
is.
a neat, it's
but
not a neat
but
idea, right?
No.
It's a
it's used
scruffy
by
one.
neets a lot, which is interesting.
It is used by
It's
needs
a
a lot.
lever used by neets. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's true.
So we're at our hour as usual, but the last thing I wanted to mention, because I think both of you would find it interesting, is just a few things about my time in Egypt. I just came back
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
from Cairo and the tour of the Nile, and
Hmm.
uh, I just found Cairo to be so interesting. I mean, that city has been there a really, really long
Yeah.
time. And it is not, my impression, it is not fixable. It is,
Hmm.
it
Huh.
is in this advanced and yet never completely advancing state of
Hmm.
falling apartness
Yeah.
that is just an amazing thing.
Hmm.
And large parts of the center city are basically a cemetery. So it's called the City
Hmm.
of the Dead, where all these fanciful mausoleums and crypts and things have been built. So imagine that, like, all of Central Park and the area around Fifth Avenue down to the 50s was all just graves.
Well,
And
yeah.
how would your city function if that were
Yeah.
the case? So it's, so from our Western eye, it looks like, how can anybody live here? And yet
Hmm.
22 million people do.
Wow.
And a lot of what the Egyptian government seems to be trying to do is create new cities
Hmm.
to perhaps get people to live somewhere else that in the
Yeah.
end would probably be healthier. I mean, the air pollution is, you know, like Delhi. It's just,
Yeah.
incomprehensible.
Stratospheric.
So I don't have any point to make about that other than uh people sometimes somehow manage to make even the messiest of situations somehow, quote unquote, work.
Hmm.
And that's something that the neats have trouble with.
Yeah.
They it annoys. I mean, they just can't. Their idea of how the world works doesn't allow for these huge megacities like Calcutta. It's not
Right.
called Calcutta now. Hell, what's it called now? Chennai? Chennai?
I don't
Uh,
know.
that's not the right word for it anymore. But these cities, uh, Cairo,
Hmm.
they shouldn't exist.
Or Rio,
Clearly,
like Rio in Brazil.
Rio or Sao Paulo is actually the worst example. Rio is
Oh yeah.
geographically contained so that it's not such a
It
mess.
doesn't. Yeah.
It doesn't sprawl.
Yeah.
And yet, left to their own devices, that seems to be where humans go
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
messiness.
Well, so
Well,
it
the
just
network
occurs to,
effects are
sorry.
powerful. Right?
Yeah.
Those
Yes,
network effects.
exactly.
It occurs to me that in the world of science, neets are physicists who are always trying to make the laws. Like this is the law where
Right.
things have to behave like this, and the roughs, what are we calling them? Scruffs. The
Scruffs.
scruffs are the
Scruff.
biologists who are like, of course, life will figure out a way to live in a hydrothermal vent.
Yes, exactly. Right.
But it can't because the enzymes, and it's like, too bad, something else will happen.
Yeah.
I was always very annoyed by this in school. I didn't go very far in the sciences. My science education I took some physics in college, but my science education basically stopped in high school. And I remember in biology, learning all of these things that were wrong but historically accurate. Like what's that? What's that term we had to memorize? Uh, Phylogeny recapitulates
Recapitulate.
ontogeny. Have you?
Yeah, right. That's
Yeah,
wrong.
right. That's wrong. But for some reason, we had to memorize that phrase, and it's still stuck in my brain. But historically, it's important step to have gone through,
Mhm.
and I think that shows the messiness of biology and the process that it follows. Whereas, yeah, the physicists, it seems to be a lot of kind of, okay, let's start from scratch and have a grand theory that unifies everything perfectly.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. And then it's great when they both come to the same place, which is
yes,
ends up being like, we don't know.
yeah. I mean, one to tie it back to Cairo, one problem is it's really hard to start cities from scratch now. There isn't
Yeah.
Yes.
a lot of unclaimed territory or land, and uh, maybe the solutions that are available, it's kind of like in cybersecurity. I think the solutions are available are, okay, do we muddle through with what we have and
Right.
just try to make Cairo more habitable, or do you take some smaller city that for some reason hasn't attracted people and try to make it, you know, except it's got a flawed premise, but try to make it more workable than Cairo, or at least take some of the pressure off of Cairo.
Yeah. Well, one of their big projects is to take the area around the old World War II battlefield of El Alamein. So this
Hmm.
is when the Nazis under Rommel almost got to Cairo,
Hmm.
and they were stopped at the Battle of El Alamein. And so
Yeah.
since then, that area was just deserted because it was full of unexploded ordnances, and it was just
Hmm.
a mess. So over the
Yeah.
last couple of decades, they've been cleaning it all out, and now they are building
Hmm.
a Dubai type mega
Hmm.
tower coastal resort there.
Well, if
That
Dubai
Yeah.
could do it, they
that
could
I,
do it.
that I guess they're hoping, foreigners will invest in, and Egyptians will move into.
Hmm.
So we'll see. I don't know.
Maybe
Yeah, I
Cairo
remember
will be
reading.
the suburb.
Huh?
Maybe
Yeah.
Cairo will become
Well,
the
it's
suburb.
so far away that Cairo can't is its own thing. Cairo can't be
Oh,
a suburb of
Mm.
anything, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Change is beautiful.
So I have to ask you
Yes.
a question, Rob. Are you still hopeful?
Sure. We're still hopeful. Yeah, I think. Um, yeah, I mean, uh, having a kid, it's hard not to be hopeful, I think. Although there's also another side of that where maybe your worries go up a bunch. Um, I think it's the more you get sucked into the the current news cycle, or um, these day-to-day things, the harder it is to be hopeful. But I've always been a little bit of an abstract person, and yeah, if you step back and go read Hume, Adam Smith, people from hundreds of years ago, I think you see more of a long arc of history, and
Right.
and there is reason to be hopeful. Um, some of the technology coming out now, I think, gives a lot of reason for hope. I mean, we didn't talk about AI safety issues, but I think there is reason to be optimistic about AI. There's all sorts of energy challenges as well. I got a little peek into that in my job at Energy Impact Partners, although I was always on the cybersecurity side. And I think there's interesting things there. Uh, yeah, I would say I'm still hopeful. I don't know what it would take to make me not hopeful. It'd have to be pretty
Well, that's good.
pretty bad.
That's great.
Good.
How about
That's
how
great.
about you? Are you still hopeful?
I am still hopeful. I am and I'm hopeful and always amused. So
Yes, if
I
you take the
try.
comedic approach to life,
Yeah,
it's much
I try
easier to be
not to
hopeful.
despair, and I don't naturally fall into despair, and yeah, I'm always hopeful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
How
I'm
about
like,
you? How about you,
me?
Julia?
I'm from the future, so I know it all
Yes,
works
you
out.
are. You
I'm
are.
just watching the story and I'm like,
Well,
this is
that's-
great.
That's the great thing that people say about people who
Yeah.
time travel into the future. They always come back and report that we're still here.
Yeah.
Yes, they always land somewhere and go, up. It's still going on. Okay.
We haven't screwed it up that bad, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's all good.
It's still
All
fixable.
right. So Robert, you're living in Bronxville?
Just south of Bronxville in Mount Vernon.
Oh, in Mount Vernon.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Oh, that's close to where I live in Alexandria.
No. This is in New York City.
No, Mount
Oh,
Vernon, New
sorry.
York. Yeah.
I'm like, wait, I lived here.
Yeah.
No.
Where's Bronxville? That's really cool. You love
All
it?
right.
You love New York?
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
It's been good. Like I said before, that you can be an optimist and a contrarian here.
Yeah.
I don't know about on DC. I mean, one of my pet theories about the major cities in the U.S. If you look at kind of the four coastal poles, and maybe this is a bit of coastal bias against Chicago and Houston, which are also very important cities. But if you look at the four coastal poles of DC, New York, LA, and San Francisco, they all have an anchor industry that is different, that the whole city kind of revolves around.
Yeah.
And I think they express themselves either in an introverted or extroverted way, and in either a broadcast way or kind of a backroom way. So I would put, if you think of like a 2x2 matrix, I would put New York is extroverted, right? Famous nightlife, people always on the go, talking a big game, very loud, but very much a backroom deals kind of city, finance and wheeler dealers. DC, I think, is a little more introverted. A lot of thinkers, a lot of very smart intellectuals, a lot of the nightlife isn't quite as raucous and rowdy as New York, although there is some, but also kind of a backroom deal cutting city. And then on the West Coast, you have the more broadcast mediums. You have LA, with its entertainment broadcast media, and but it's also kind of a backroom. It's kind of, maybe I'm getting this wrong. LA is.
Well, they all have backroom, like all of those cities have those backroom deals, I think.
Yes. Yeah, they all have backroom deals, but it's it's the broadcast medium and it's the extroverted West Coast city.
Right.
Yeah.
So New York and LA kind of share that media overlap. Party cities where there's a lot of talk, and then San Francisco Bay Area tends to be the more intellectual, introverted, but it's also a broadcast city. Yeah, it's DC-like in that way.
Yeah.
A lot of think tanks, a lot of big picture, kind of
trying to change the world.
Change the world, right? But it's a broadcast city, right? It's the internet medium. It's the pushing ideas out into the world. It's making an impact.
Yeah.
Although there's certainly wheeler dealers, backroom, Sandhill VCs.
We have to do another segment on psychoanalyzing the U.S. cities, and we need to include Chicago because that's bullshit.
Yes.
And
I think that's
I'm
fair.
also thinking of Atlanta, which is the center of African American culture.
Yeah.
I mean, New York is big too, but definitely, and DC for that matter. But
well, and we have to
it's
at least
different.
include Houston.
Yes.
And Dallas.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Miami in there too. But
yes. All right, it's falling apart. Time to
right there.
It was really neat when you had a 2x2. That was great.
Yeah, that's very neat. Yes.
It's exploding out into the scruffy
That's what all the neat people want, is they want the 2x2.
Yes. Well, all models are wrong. Some are useful.
That's right.
Right.